And so finally, on to postmodernism. Postmodernism can be a difficult thing to get your head around, but perhaps it's easiest to start with the idea that post means after. So postmodernism means after modernism. So it is suggesting our society has moved past its modern or industrial stage. You could call it post-industrialism, or some have often called it post-structuralism, which gives you an idea of its origins. It fits clearly on the agency side of the structure agency scale. As I've just said, often referred to as post-structuralism, one of its key elements is to deny the validity of structure and structural approaches. We have talked about functionalist, we've talked about Marxist, and we talked about feminist as structural approaches. Postmodernists would call these approaches modern, if that makes sense. So what they're doing is denying that these approaches have, or indeed structure itself, has validity in the way in which it looks at society. Following on from the social action theorists on the agency side, who see that culture is negotiated and so variable, and that we take it as a stock of interpretation from which we can mix and choose, giving more of a fragmented, less singular culture. If it is reinterpreted each time it is put out, as it were, it will be different in each case. Postmodernism, if you like, takes this idea further and looks, and is really very much an attack on structural approaches. Just so we're up front with it to begin with, anyone watching this who are doing science or is pro-science or believes in the scientific principles, I have to say straight up here, postmodernism is anti-science. It is avowedly stating that science is bunk, if you like, and it is no longer relevant in our world. It starts with the basis of the idea that modernism or industrialism died with the advent of the information superhighway. That is, when the internet came along, we were exposed globally to a multiplicity of cultures, a multiplicity of truth. There are so many that we can no longer talk about a single one unifying culture which is fixed and determined. There are just cultures, and the information superhighway has hit us in other ways. The other thing is globalization. Globalization has meant, as in this picture here, that most industry, most manufacture globally takes place in the Far East. And countries such as the UK, who used to be the factory of the world, no longer produce, no longer make things in the same way. If I could put it this way, we have moved from a situation where our economy was primarily a manufacturing economy, a production economy, to one that provides services and is a cultural economy, or is about ideas rather than things. It's about finance sector. It's about, and what we have changed as a society is a society of producers. We have become a society of consumers. We are no longer tied to production in the same way. And likewise, we have become more and more sophisticated as consumers, demanding greater variation, greater choice, and that drives the economy. It is that choice that drives the economy. The key issue that postmodernists have with functionalism and Marxism is the way in which these modernists claim to have the sole version of the truth. What, if I can use by an analogy, it's like saying is back in the day when this logo was the BBC logo, 1969, there were only 3 channels, BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. All our information came from those 3 channels. If you switch your television on now, you may have up to 50 channels of choice. Think of this as a metaphor for what happens when the internet came into our lives, from having single ideas of the truth, unifying ideas of the truth, if you like. We have so many different opinions, so many different choices. We can do and be where we want. Again, if I can, Top of the Pops back in my day used to be watched by millions. When I turned up to school on a Friday morning after Top of the Pops was on a Thursday night, you could almost guarantee as I walked through the school gates, there would be some people singing the tune of the #1 spot. We all watched the same thing. We were all together. We shared a common experience in this cultural way. What modernism attempted to do, or the application of scientific principles, was to provide what postmodernists would call a meta-narrative, a big story, an encompassing thing that would explain everything. Marxism had a clear point of view. It was very clear as to why things were happening, the power source, what was going on. It was all about the money. Functionalists likewise have a very clear view of what society is and what it should be, and so on and so forth. These modernist approaches made great claims for their ability to predict the future and the predictability of people, but they deny the relevance of that today. There is no one size fits all. There is no one explanation, because we know that we aren't in a single culture, but in a multiplicity of different cultures. Science used to be the driver, used to be the thing that we had faith in that would provide a better and better future. If you think of shows like Star Trek back in the 60s, it was this idea of looking out on the horizon and the sky's the limit. Similarly, you've got the idea of the space race. I mean, romantically, it seemed like a great thing. At the time, it was the start of our mankind's exploration of space. But in the reality, wasn't this just a colossal waste of money? What's the point of going all the way to the moon and back? What did it achieve? It is the optimism, it is the faith in technology and progress that this represents, which is what modernism is. So postmodernism says that this is no longer there, that we have no longer the certainties of science. We do not trust science in the way that we used to, and that we do not look to a future that seems always brighter and brighter. Science has produced nuclear energy, as an example. Nuclear energy and nuclear weapons have made that certainty less. Science is not the only story, and its claim to be the dominant thing that will deliver all has been shaken, and that we have a different attitude to science than we used. To postmodernists, scientists are latter-day priests who obscure the truth rather than reveal it, that want to be the holders of the book, the keys to the future. But postmodernist says this is only one version of reality. Science has let us down. It does not lead to this glorious future. It has very frightening and needs to be controlled consequences. Another example of I'm trying to give some examples of what we mean by the contrast between modernism and postmodernism. Modernism, if you like, one of the theories of modernism, Marxism, looking at socialism, looking at the idea of the welfare state and looking at the way in which the society protects us. That would be the idea that the police would be visible on the beat. They would be there to protect the public. That is a very modern idea, or one that fits with modernity and that kind of thing. A postmodern idea is to do with the risk and uncertainty. So neighbourhood watch is us doing the policing for ourselves, us taking responsibility to mark our property so it can be identified if it's stolen. We no longer trust this thing called the state and the police to do it for us. It is about us doing it for ourselves. So neighbourhood watch is a kind of very typical of the idea of postmodernism. Similarly, when we go to our GP, when I went to school, we trusted the professionals who gave us advice or taught us. It would be unheard of in my day for a student to challenge a teacher on their ability to teach. The trust would be too strong. Whereas now, because we have the information superhighway, we can check. We feel we're all experts, right? Similarly, when we take a consultation from our local GP, no longer do we have in awe someone with such high status because of their scientific knowledge. We've got the internet. The internet blows them away because we've got 120 different medical opinions on the symptoms that we've got. We feel able to challenge the doctor's advice and seek further advice if needs be. We get married on the beach these days rather than in churches, or at least some of us do, or on the top of buildings, or on all sorts of variations. This is not the old-fashioned way of the structure of a church service and all the rest of it. This reflects the enormous switch between duty and choice. We did things as we were told in modernity. We conformed to a solid, singular culture and identity. Now we are driven by our lifestyle choices. We have infinite availability to do things our way. And so you can get married the way you want. You don't need to get married in a church. We can choose how to conduct our lives in any which way we choose. That's the nature of postmodernism. This is a consumer society, not a productive. Consumer values are more important. It is it's referred to, the concept here, as a pick and mix society. So think of all these cultures that we're being exposed to via the internet and all the rest of it. We can choose our identity from a smorgasbord of different bits and pieces, like the pick and mix in Woolworths, although obviously Woolworths has gone, which we could start talking about that being postmodern, where we can grab our identity from disparate parts and create our own self. Take myself. In a modernist way, as a teacher, my identity would be to do with what I do, where I work, who I work with. These are all very kind of structural ideas, that it is about what I do, it is about how I fit in society, it is about my duty, it is about status and structure and all the rest of that. According to postmodernists, however, that is far less important, because I could go out, get a Rasta hat and wig, put a ghetto blaster over my shoulder. I'm a Rasta man. I can choose, right? I can make a choice on how I live my life. And that identity is the prime identity, not my identity as a teacher. I could become a hairy biker overnight. I could put the big cap on, get a Harley Davidson. So consumer choices are far more important in forming identity than what we used to do for a living, which is a very modern way of viewing who we are and what we are.